Got to narrow that screen down.
Hello and welcome to Healing Hands Ministries Open Book Series. I'm Pastor Stevens, your facilitator. We look at the Bible from a contextual point of view. We try and understand seriously the author's intent, and we focus our attention on the original audience that received the letter, received the document, and then we try to grapple with its implications and reapplication for contemporary living. Thank you so much for joining us. Grab your Bible now and sit back and let's look at some insights from the biblical text. Let's study.
How's everybody doing? Yes, I am seriously discombobulated. You hear me? I have wrestled with the YouTube network. I've been fighting, but I'm victorious here. I'm victorious. I'm here. Lord bless my heart. I'm here. Listen, we've been dealing with the Markan study. Now I worked up a sweat. I got to turn my fan on. Y'all excuse a brother here. We've been looking at the study. Jesus has left the Jerusalem according to Mark's recollection. He's left the Galilean ministry, and he's kind of traveling, circuitously traveling, I might add, just kind of going places. But much of his teaching since chapter 9, verse 30, has been all about directionality for the disciples. And periodically, he'll run into a crowd scene, and in doing so, he'll kind of like erect the pulpit and go to teaching and preaching and carrying on. Such is the case with chapter 10, where Luke tells us that Jesus has just finished. You recall the discussion of the little children when he brought the child. They were doing the little thing, the greatness discussion. When they didn't hear the second passing prediction, they got quiet. He brought the little child up when he learned that who is the greatest among you, and he did that. And then came the issue of the exorcists who were casting out demons in my name, Jesus' name, and they wanted to stop him. And so Jesus gave them a powerful teaching there. Whoever is not against us is for us. Leave him alone, because he's doing what he's doing in my name, okay? Then comes an interesting teaching at 42, the temptation to sin, and we walk through that discussion, leaving us with the salt metaphor at the end at 49. By the time we get to chapter 10, Jesus is leaving that area with them, and he walks right into, let's read, chapter 10, verse 1. He left that place and went to the region of Judea and beyond the Jordan. And crowds gathered around him, and as was his custom, he again taught them. Some testing him asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" He answered them, "What did Moses say? What did Moses command you?" They said, "Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her." Jesus said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, he wrote this commandment for you. But for the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." Then in the house, the disciples asked him again about this matter. He said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." Okay. There are some oddities here that we're going to have to adjust to understanding. But let's just take it from the top and get the context clear. Because believe you me, this is a controversial passage. And I was just speaking with a preacher earlier, and he asked me if I would feel uncomfortable teaching the pericope, since I have engaged in divorce. And I said to him, no, I wouldn't. Okay? And so we'll look at that. Jesus has completed his ministry in Galilee. He's moving closer and closer to his final acts. The ancient city of Jerusalem, where the final acts of the redemptive drama will be played out clearly, okay? It's supposed to take place there. He set his face towards his accomplishment of his divine mission. Keep that in mind. He's not just meandering around and walks into a crowd, but he has purpose and mission, and his focus is very clear, okay? The question posed by the Pharisees, first of all, wasn't a sincere one. Verse 2 tells us that. Some testing him asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? So whatever they were doing, they were putting it on a platform that would cause problems for Jesus. How would that be a problem discussing marriage and divorce? Well, the fact that Jesus was in Perea, which is Herod Antipas territory, may be pretty significant when we start to unravel and dismantle this text, break it down so we can work with it. Okay. Well, who is Herod Antipas? Well, you remember Herod the Great. He had 3 sons, Antipas, Archelaus, and I always forget one of them. I always forget one of them. Okay, but anyway, Antipas, we just go on with like I didn't forget the third one. Antipas, Archelaus. Did I say Antipas, Archelaus? Who is that third one? Okay. Anyway, so Antipas was the Herod that we learned about that jailed John the Baptist and later had him killed, had him beheaded. Okay, so we're in a hotbed issue in a hotbed region. And the Pharisees were hoping that Jesus would say something either way, it didn't matter to them, that would hold him in contention with Antipas, okay? Antipas married Herodias, okay? Which was, that was all about the brother. Well, see, that was just the environment. Go, let me ask you something, bro, Pastor. Let me ask you. I ain't trying to defend nobody, but they go to acting crazy and acting like they're trying to get information, and they're really trying to drag you into something that you might say something that would cause you to lose some sense of credibility, or really to accuse you if necessary. The hope was, of course, that Jesus would make a statement on marriage and divorce that would get him in trouble with Antipas, and he would suffer the same fate as John did, okay? Now, on the question of lawfulness of divorce, that was a general consciousness of the Jews, and that was divorce was allowed. Now you got to understand now, divorce in their custom, in their time, is not the same as ours. Okay, in a Western culture, in today's culture. Okay, even back then in a Western culture, it was different. You see, in a Western culture, marriage was a contract of sorts between 2 equals, man and woman. Okay, in Jewish marriage, it was a contract between a woman and a man, but not equal. The woman did not marry, but she was given in marriage by her father. That's important, okay? So the context of marriage that we're dealing with is set in that consciousness, okay? It wasn't a situation he got down on one knee and popped the ring out. No. The husband, the man that the father chose both and set it up. And there would always be some kind of arrangement that would be beneficial to either the father or the family, whatever, okay? Now, the husband was the only one who could divorce, okay? The wife could not jump up and file for divorce. And so the husband had these attitudes. If for any reason he was dissatisfied or displeased with her behavior, according to one school of thought, okay, he could simply just divorce her. I don't like you. You burnt my bacon. I'm not happy with you. Okay? I find something about you disgusting, something about you displeasing. And it would be very, very, very easy for him to just file for divorce, or get rid of dismissal, rid of divorce. But the wife could not divorce her husband. Now she could go before the court and force him to divorce her if he was engaged in some kind of disgusting occupation, or he was involved in some kind of, had a certain disease, or he made her make vows that were detrimental to herself and to harm to herself. Those kinds of things she could, but she couldn't file for the divorce. She had to take him before the courts, and the courts would force him to file for divorce. Now that was kind of like the structure. But just in general, the law itself, can a man divorce his wife? According to the Jew, he sure could. Yes, he could. Because the law gave him that. The real difference centers around the grounds for divorce. Now, in Deuteronomy, you gotta know all this to understand what's going on. So just hold on now. I don't know about all that history. Well, that's because you don't want to understand the context, okay? And you just want to make it be what you want it to be. Chill out. Okay, then in Deuteronomy, where the law is derived, 24:1. If a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her, he writes her a certificate of divorce. And the crucial word is something indecent. And what did that include? Well, now that's where you start getting into the schools of thought. With the Shema school of thought, the stricter school, by the way, anything immoral or morally indecent, in particular adultery, okay? And that's the man looking at the woman, right? In the school of Hillel, which is more liberal, more relaxed, anything in a wife that a husband did not find to his liking was suitable for grounds for divorce. If she burned his food, like I was saying earlier. So those two schools of thought, Shema and Hillel. So it depends on where you were at. But the Jews knew this. All this was controversial. That's what they were trying to thrust him into, that whole crazy discussion. People do that in Bible study. They know all the issues going on. And then, let me ask you now, what you think? Trying to get you to say something dumb in front of everybody, right? Okay? Oh, boy. I love it when they do me like that, because I'll be ready. I don't play around, but I'll be ready, okay? With all the questions. I am prepared to deal with it as best I can. Now, listen to this. In verse 3, look what Jesus does. See, I watch Jesus. I like how Jesus moved. Jesus said, well, let me ask you something. What did Moses command? Why would he do that? Because he understood that Moses gave them the law. And that everybody was, he's going to get everybody in there to commit to the Mosaic contract, okay? So what Jesus, and he often did that whenever controversy going on with religious leaders, because they like to argue and fuss and debate. And does that sound like anybody you know? We got church folk that are like that. Go to YouTube and watch the preachers. I think he's wrong. And watch how they argue with each other and constantly criticizing each other. The Jews were like that because everybody wants to be right. Nobody wants to listen to Jesus, who is righteousness. Okay, Jesus says, now let's look. He's acting very, very directly. Moses was their authority. What did he say? And Jesus knew they would appeal to Moses, that their appeal to Moses would make them commit themselves. Now, as we talked about, Jesus did not question the law, but his answer reaches back to that first principle. Moses' permission to divorce, verse 4, was an accommodation to human weakness. Okay? Remember? See if I can find it. Look at verse 4. They said, Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of dismissal and of divorce, and to divorce her. But Jesus said, quickly, because of your hardness of heart, he wrote this commandment for you. Now, that dialogue needs to be understood. They went to the Mosaic law, and in the Mosaic law, for this reason, okay, Jesus argued that Moses was saying to them, because of their hardness of heart, for that reason, he allowed them the writ of divorce. Now, what is the hardening of heart? So you got to understand this term, the hardening of heart. Well, he takes them to Genesis in verse 6, okay? But from the very beginning of creation, God made them male and female, okay? And for this reason, this is so powerful, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh, okay? That's what he's talking about, the hardening of the heart. If two people come together and cannot accomplish that, therein lies the hardening of heart. Now, this was not like, well, we just reach irreconcilable differences, you know. No, well, that might be the way you see it. But the thought is, marriage is the epitome of institutions of God. He compared his relationship to man with marriage, his Christ, the bridegroom. Jesus, God was rooted into the idea of marriage, even from creation. Male, female, one, marriage. So, in order to preserve the sanctity of marriage, a man with a hardened heart was allowed to step out of that sacred bond that it might not be desecrated. Okay? For this reason. This was not irreconcilable differences. This was God's institution. See, Christian marriage, the two are taking vows in the presence of believers, supposedly. It's a worship service, by the way, before believers. And the vows are not to one another. The vows are to God about one another. That's the context. So then, if I am not able to become one with this person, then that is my offense to God. And rather than make a mockery of Christian marriage because of the hardening of the heart, the writ of divorce was allowed. It was never God's intention for divorce. That's something that so the rabbis, when they interpreted the law, they heard in their ears, it's all right. God approves of it. But no, that's not what God was doing. As the text says, the hardening of the heart is preventing what God intended. And if your marriage is not about what God intended, then the sanctity of the marriage is in the hands of those who've committed themselves to it. So now somebody needs to do something other quick. So see, I would argue, given the context of the teaching, first of all, that while he laid out the distinctive teachings on marriage, this was not a discussion about marriage and divorce. This was a platform of marriage and divorce with the intent of entrapment with Jesus. And so he just worked it through Moses, the Genesis, took him straight to all that Moses had to say about marriage and divorce, took us right through the cultural understanding. He just walked through the whole conglomerate of craziness. But this was really not they weren't looking for information. They already understood what they understood. What they understood was that divorce was okay. And when Jesus finished with them, I wonder how they felt when they had to go, oh, wait, hold up. So wait, what? Because remember now, Jesus' claim was, I know what my daddy intended when he did that. He gave the writ of divorce to Moses, not because of irreconcilable differences. He gave the writ of divorce to Moses because of hard-heartedness. Now that's deep. He gave that because of the hard heart is not going to hold to the sanctity of marriage. The hardened heart. Be thinking with Stevens as we keep traveling. It should be ringing in your head. You know, And my move to divorce was because I saw that wasn't happening. Two were not becoming one. As a matter of fact, I saw myself going this way and my household and my bride going that way. And I value the institution of marriage with all my heart. Believe in it firmly. Desired it so greatly. But it wasn't happening. And I was not going to make a mockery of God's great institution, playing games with someone I knew was not interested in my calling, in my mission, in my journey. See, I was on my way to Jerusalem. and look like Sister Glover, and that's fine. Nobody gets to say, I married 3 good women. They were just 3 good women who were not interested in what was to take place in my personal Jerusalem. So I filed for divorce. So no, I don't have a problem teaching this. As a matter of fact, it's good time to teach it. Okay? So when we look at 4, 5, 6, and 7, we get a real picture of where Moses, he says, what did Moses say? And in asking the question, he just dug it up. Did you hear me say he dug it up? He gave them every morsel of truth to bring to their understanding, and they quickly saw that their rabbinical the way they interpret what the rabbis have said, what the rabbis themselves had taught, was not what God said. The writ of divorce was not a statement of approval of divorce. God never intended for divorce. You can hear that. He says, and the two shall become one flesh, so they are no longer 2, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Marriage was indissoluble in the mind of God. The Christian marriage is that way. See, that should be ringing, bells should be ringing in your head. I once counseled a couple, and the husband, they were both Christian. And they that's always the start of your Christian. Is this a Christian marriage? Otherwise, I don't need to be talking to you. Now, if it's a Christian marriage, let me ask, sir, what's going on? Why are you asking me? You said it was Christian, sir. And Christian marriage, you're the head of the household. So as the official head of the household in a Christian marriage, what's going on? Turns out he had about 2 or 3 affairs. Hello? In a Christian marriage? So the beginning of repair and reconciliation in the work is set before us. And we know how to handle and how to move. Because marriage is, true marriage, Christian marriage, is indissoluble. You can tell when your marriage will endure. No man could put it under. In the words of the King James Version, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Time for some probing, huh? There are lots of reasons, lots of hurdles, but Christian marriages embrace Christian principles. And shouldn't be entered in ill-advisedly because it's Christian. One of the things we have to begin to grapple with is that everything that God ordains is on a much deeper level than it is casually experienced in the world. Like Christian friendship. No greater love than a man would lay down his life for his friends becomes the kind of modeling that we deal with. So that Christian friends, there's a depth selflessness and self-sacrifice. There's a depth involved. So is marriage, Christian marriage. Not all marriages are Christian. Let's face it. So you see how unimportant the discussions that people are having. Jesus is pointing them to Scripture. In his time, Moses, the law. Scripture, what does it mean? What has God said to Moses that he said to you? Now hear what I'm saying to you. That's what we got going on here. So Jesus took it as an opportunity to minister to the crowd and to teach the apostles, but more importantly, to fulfill rabbinic error. What the rabbis did not really grapple with very closely, okay? So Moses' permission for divorce was an accommodation to human weakness. And the weakness was the inability to preserve the institution of marriage. Okay? It's kind of an attempt to bring some sort of order in a society that disregarded God's standards. See, in Christian marriage, God's standards are the standards. The vows that you're taking, those are God's standards. And you're agreeing, you're standing in the presence of God, and you're saying to him, this is it, your standard for our lives. And so, it becomes important. Go back into creation and notice something. The creation of man and woman. God made man from the dust of the earth, and from the rib of Adam he created woman. And Adam then now lives for his rib. It's cute, ain't it? That's your rib, baby. You know, I mean that's the foundation that we're on. So the whole commitment of marriage is innate in creation. The two become one. Well, yes, in accordance to creation. This is not a discussion about social norms and social rules and regulations. This is the foundation of human creation from the part of God. Think seriously. You know, and you have to explain this to people when they're getting married and they say they're getting into a Christian marriage. Don't enter into a Christian marriage ill-advisedly. You could condemn your soul so quickly. The institution is used to describe your deliverance and your salvation. This is God's mantle. As deep as creation. His Christ, the deliverance. Come on, the bridegroom. You better hear somebody. This is important. This is really important, okay? Moses' bill of divorce is seriously a part of the idea of making the distinction between the absolute will of God and what are the provisions that take into account sinfulness of man and it's intended to limit and control its effects. And as our sinful nature is always at work within us. But if you're hard-hearted, that you make a mockery of the institution of marriage, you're digging deep into the very nature of God. That's why the writ of divorce was awarded to Moses, to avoid that sin. This is the deal. Christian marriage is true to the test of time. And the commitment of faith being real. Two shall become one, which is where they started. The rib comes home. I ain't got no help here with this rib thing. I kind of like the rib story. Okay. So then, marriage is grounded in this male-female constitution as to its nature, and implies that men and women are united in one flesh. And so God sanctioned that as Christian marriage. It's divine, and its continuance, its permanence. Okay? Now, I will take just a second to say this, and I'm not getting into it because I don't want to argue with you. I don't want to get into none of y'all arguing saints. Okay? There are some discussions and some realities that don't belong in the body of Christ. This is how we view marriage. That should answer any question that you may have. Christian marriage looks like this. Christian marriage. Now, as I had to explain to a friend of mine of late, marriage is not a Christian monopoly. There are people who are not in Christ, who do not love Christ, who do not honor God, get married every day. Just because you're married does not mean that you're in a Christian marriage any more than all of your friendships are Christian friendships. The depth and the realness, doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So it doesn't matter if you get married in a big old church or if you get married downtown. It's in spirit and in truth. It's the seriousness, the major focus. Okay? But the parameters are set. And when we start trying to undo the parameters and bring them as Christian, we got a problem. You undoing the parameters for you wherever you at, that's on you. But when it comes to the dogma of the church, God's church, now not the Broadway church where they're doing everything, selling dope in the back door and everything, not them. The narrow way perspective, the Christ way. The issues are clear. If you're debating them in church, it's because you went through the wrong door. You went through the broad door. Had you gone through the narrow door, that would be irrelevant. It's clear. Because guess who stands at the narrow gate? And who offers prohibitives? Only Christ. And it's his way or no way at the narrow gate. See, it's not an issue. But if you're hungry about it, I know you at the broad road, where all those things are really important. I might sound a little bit fallacious. I can't say the word. I might find a little bit, I can't think what I was going to say. Crazy. I'm not trying to be cynical about it. I'm just saying that it's real sad that some of the facetious, okay, that's what I'm trying to say, facetious. I'm not trying to be facetious about the matter. But there are a lot of prominent preachers, bishops, et cetera, who are up in the Broadway perspective, up there at that Broadway, went through that broad door, and they just fighting all over the place. They're killing each other off verbally. Just going off over who can and who can't. And it's not their call. Go the narrow gate, where Jesus is the prohibitive voice. Narrow, restrictive. That's what's the narrow way. So these issues are real clear, and if we stand clear and listen to the argument here that's being made and that Jesus is making, it answers all of the crazy questions that people are trying to pose as relevant questions to the church. See, that secular Christianity that reigns in the Broadway perspective is problematic. But the Christ way, the decisions are already made. Okay? The Christian marriage, Jesus taught them clearly, is not a contract of temporary convenience, not a union that may be dissolved at will, but baby, it is indissoluble. All right? Now, since marriage is a lifelong union between man and woman, its claims take precedence over father and mother, family, origin of family origin. That's another biggie. Okay, when a man shall leave his mother and his father, leave his mother and father, and cleave, King James Version, I love King James, and cleave to his wife, and the two become one. That's the story. So that the idea is the forsaking of the house of one's father. It was far more meaningful than just moving in with a girl down the street, and then y'all go to the justice of the peace. Okay, or y'all go down to the go on a voyage and the sea captain marry you. See, if you're gonna do Christian marriage, then you got to bring this climate with you. Not necessarily the church. You can get married on a boat, but you got to bring this climate with you. And there's this idea of the man forsaking all others for the solidarity of his own, of his wife, turning his back on his own clan. See, in a Jewish culture, what you say? No, they were freaking. You know, but Jesus was putting emphasis there, even though it was the marital relationship of the husband and wife becoming one and becoming one flesh was a Semitic expression. They struggled with it because the men were so cruel and hard-hearted. You know, in many cases, a Jewish man could literally involve himself with pagan women and not be considered an adulterer because they're not Jewish. They just had it like that. So what Jesus has actually done here is made a very radical teaching, created a very radical sense. And I mean, if you think about it, the woman caught in adultery, everybody always asks, where was the man? He caught her. The rabbi, the teachers caught her. They saw her. The man wasn't important. It was adultery. How unlikely would it be that a man would be accused of adultery? No, not a man. The woman was the one doing the adultery. She was given in marriage. So see, it was such a warped structure, and it was culture. And Jesus, listen to what he's saying. He's sliding right in there and forcing them to deal with the discipline of marriage. Behind this concept of indissolubility of marriage is the authority of God himself. Divorce was contrary to the divine institution, and contrary to the nature of marriage, and contrary to divine action by which the union is effected. I read that because I wanted to say it just like it was written because it's very powerful, okay? Divorce is contrary to the divine institution and contrary to the nature of marriage, contrary to the divine action by which the union is effected. It is precisely at this point that it is wickedness, its wickedness becomes singularly apparent. Divorce becomes wicked, okay? Because of the reason, because of all the things I just told you. Not because you filed for divorce, you wicked. No, that's what the rabbis did. Listen to what I just told you about what Christian marriage is. If that be the case, you know. Now at 10 and 11, and these are the hardest two to conjecture, to work with. Mark doesn't give us a response at all to a Pharisee's response to Jesus at all about divorce. Instead, he moves directly to Jesus to Jesus' private teachings of the 12. You see, he realized that was really the focus. They were trying to get me to say something, and then Antipas could take odds with, right? So now he moves them into the house. Then in the house, the disciples asked him again about this matter. Now remember, he's doing his teaching. All right. The disciples wanted to clarify, kind of like wanted a clarification of what Jesus had just finished saying in verse 10. Okay, when they go into the house, well, bro, what you saying now? And Jesus gave them a straightforward answer: divorce and remarriage by husband or wife is adultery. Okay, now you got to put that in its context. We just take that, well, if you marry somebody and you divorce them and then you get married again, you in adultery. No. Okay? We have not changed the context. We are dealing with Christian marriage. Okay? He gave you the writ of divorce to eliminate this outcome. Because for God, marriage is indissoluble. Think about it. That's not the intent of God. So that takes you all the way back to entering in ill-advisedly, being hard of heart, and not interested in the parameters of Christian marriage, leaving your mother and your father, and becoming one with your wife. You still at home taking care of your mama. Ain't got no help up here. You refuse. You're just not there. Okay. So the idea of divorce and remarriage is filtering in the idea of what the rabbis were dealing with, that he did not have a problem with divorce. And what he had a problem with is marriages that did not meet the criteria of marriage, where there's no such entity as divorce. You see? Jesus pretty much did what rabbis refused to do. He recognized that a man could commit adultery against his wife. See, that's the real deal. That's the teaching right there. Because these men, Jewish men, that can never happen. Adultery? Oh, no. No. I'm just the man. I'm just the husband. I'm the head. I made a decision. And so Jesus basically, in verse 11, notice he said, whoever divorces his wife. Okay? He's talking clearly about them dealing with the fact that recognizing a man could commit adultery against his wife. Okay? In rabbinic Judaism, a woman by infidelity could commit adultery against her husband. And a man by having sexual relations with another man's wife could commit adultery against him. But a man could never commit adultery against his wife. And that was the way that they understood and the way they thought. Does that make sense? Let me say it again because it's really kind of important. I told you this was a kind of murky decision. It's kind of tight, so you got to listen carefully. Jesus did what rabbis refused to do. Okay? They listened to Deuteronomy, the law, and they basically saw it because he gave the writ of divorce, that divorce was okay. Okay? And then depending on which school of thought you were in, if you were in the real strict school of thought, then your treatment of your wife was very, very tight and very rigid. And if you found something disgusting about her, you had permission. In the weaker version, the Hillel, this is all about arbitration. Still, in both of them, the male has the right. You can just arbitrarily pick anything and have a problem with. Okay, and so the rabbis said divorce was okay. So in Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, the infidelity could commit adultery. Infidelity could commit adultery against her husband. Okay, the woman could break her vow or whatever, and she could actually commit adultery against her husband. But by having sexual relations with another man's wife, he could commit adultery against the man's husband. All right, this is all about men, okay? So a man could never commit adultery against his wife, no matter what he did. Jesus, by putting the husband under the same moral obligation as the wife, raised the standard and the dignity of women. And that's what's going on. All right, that's what's happening in the clothes. That's the lesson on the inside. Okay, remember now, this was not a discussion about the rules of marriage. This was a discussion about the culturalization of marriage on a platform of marriage and divorce. And near the end, Jesus says to them, ha ha ha, a man can do just what a woman can do, commit adultery. Okay, and that's why the writ of divorce was given. Now, you got to think that one through. But I've tried to, keep it kind of light and take it slow so you can hear it, because you need to hear it. Don't treat this as a teachings on marriage and divorce. Treat this as a platform on marriage and divorce brought to Jesus for an agenda, a hidden agenda. That's why they go into the house and go, now let me ask you, because that was what did you say? And what he had done was he simply introduced, he neutralized the male role and explained the writ of divorce and the intent of God from creation, so that very clearly, if you're entering into the arena of divorce in your mind, you had a lot to think about. You had a lot to deal with, being the head of the house. That's what Jesus did. I think it was pretty smart. Well, if you got questions, holler at me. We'll leave it at that. We'll see you guys next week. I hope you followed this discussion. If not, send me a word and we'll do it again. I'd love to do it again. God bless your hearts, and we'll see you when we see you.
It seems that our time has come and gone for this study. I trust that we've said something to inspire you, something to tamper with the way that you understand things, to keep you off balance, so that you'll always be desirous of new insights and enlightenment, that your faith might grow rapidly, that you might become stronger saints. Listen, why don't you consider subscribing to our ministry? Remember, if you should do so, to ring the bell so that you can get the notification that the book is open every time we open it. If you'd like to be a supporter of our ministry financially, we're providing the information for you so that you might be able to share out of your blessings. We thank you so much now, and we look forward to seeing you again at our very next study.